to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 5th annual TEDxBellarmineU event. Thank you. My name is Abby Bullock, and I am one of your MCs for the evening. We just have a couple of housekeeping rules before we get started. Please look around to notice the exits around you. Emergency exits are over there to your right and over there to your left. Bathroom is at those doors right at the back. And we will have one 15-minute intermission right in the middle of the program. And also, please no getting on phones during the program, and do not get up during the talks. Trust me, they will be interesting. You won't want to leave. And no photography whatsoever. We have photographers doing that for you. All right, and now it is my utmost pleasure to introduce my fellow MC for the evening, Mr. Jacob Schumann.
Thank you, Abby. Oh, I'm so excited to be here.
Yes,
this is awesome.
yes.
The lights are brighter, I think, every year.
I think so.
Well, thank you, Abby. Our theme for tonight's TEDx is narratives. This year's event features individual narratives. At TEDxBellarmineU 2023, come experience people's stories to find the value in your own. Tonight, we have 7 different speakers who will tell 7 different stories. Also, this year, we are going to be sharing 3 different stories of our own. We'll be sharing what happens before the event, what happens during the event, so right now, and what happens after the event. In that note, I'd like to take the time to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is a physician executive, speaker, and coach. Her talk is entitled, Inviting Diverse Stories into Medicine. Please welcome to the stage, Dr. Nwando Anyaoku.
Thank you. A few years ago, as a practicing pediatrician in Newark, New Jersey, I had a patient who came to me from the war-torn West African country of Liberia. She spoke English with a heavy accent, and she didn't understand the US educational or health system, and so she had difficulty knowing how to advocate for herself or her children. Her clinic visits were always a trip, as the team did our best to support her. I remember like it was yesterday when I had to walk into the room and tell her that I was relocating to another city. She bent her head, closed her eyes, shook her head, and then she looked at me and said, "Who is going to understand me now?" I was her doctor, but she was asking about something else. She was saying not about my clinical training or expertise. What she was going to miss was me, my whole self. Where was she going to find somebody who looked like me, sounded like me, had the experiences I had, and would use those experiences to understand and help her? You see, I too was born in a war in West Africa, albeit a different country, Nigeria. I didn't speak her tribal language, but I understood her broken English. bringing my whole self to the table enabled me to serve her as she needed. The trouble is that systems default to uniformity and conformity. There's a mental model of what a team member should look like, and people who don't fit that model struggle to be accepted and included. The way we change this begins by seeing value in other people's stories. And the first step is to understand that the most important thing you bring into service is yourself, your expertise, your perspective, your journey, your whole self. When we can understand and value our own whole stories, then we can understand and value our patients. The pandemic threw a spotlight on serious inequities that are suffered by some populations. Black, Hispanic, and Indigenous Americans, for example, suffered a 3 to 4 times higher rate of infection and death from COVID. The drivers of these disparities weave a complex story, including issues like cultural awareness, trust, access, and other social and political drivers, a legacy of decades of historic structural racism. As we've worked to understand and correct these inequities, research has shown us that diversifying our clinical teams is an evidence-based way to achieve and improve health equity. But healthcare systems have worked for decades to promote standardization of care and reduce variability. This has been great to develop high-quality care, but it asks us to treat patients equally and not necessarily equitably. Equal care, in which every patient gets the same care plan, has really been the gold standard. In fact, it's the first thing I hear from physicians when I talk to them about health equity. I treat everyone the same, they'll say to me. Equitable care, however, understands that patients are all starting from different places. And so you have to give each patient what they need to achieve optimal health. When you have a team that is very different from the patients we serve, it can allow our biases to come to the fore. I remember as a pediatrician, I would often say to the young doctors, "You can't love that baby more than his mama does." It was my way of telling them to check their biases, which suggested to them that they knew better than the mother how to love and care for her child. I would remind them that our patients are individuals with their own stories, their own histories, their own experience of health, and understanding of their needs. And it was our responsibility to meet them at a place where we could communicate effectively. Giving them the care that they deserved required understanding their individuality as well as the symptoms that they presented. I've had to educate myself on historical policies such as redlining, which contribute to healthcare disparities. What I can tell you, though, from over 2 decades of practicing clinical medicine, is just how difficult it is to build and sustain a diverse clinical team. It starts as far back as middle school, when non-majority students are severely underrepresented in science, technology, engineering, and math STEM classes. It continues through high school, medical school, college, residency, and all of their careers. I have had the opportunity over the years to mentor and support many minority physicians who find themselves isolated and targeted, othered and made to feel not a part of their team. The narrative is depressingly similar, whether I've heard it on the East Coast, the West Coast, or in the middle of the country. What's up with your hair? You mean the way it grows out of my head? Why don't you smile more? At what? You're so aggressive. You seem angry. You're not a team player. These statements are dropped in their laps, often with no explanation, no examples or context. And gradually, they weave themselves into a more insidious narrative, leaving these doctors perplexed and distressed. Am I supposed to be smiling all the time? Should my hair look like yours even though it pops out of my head differently? What am I to do? And often, they will start trying to minimize themselves, not show up their full self, or they run the risk of having their careers or training cut short. And this happens more often than we're willing to discuss. A recent study by stat.com, funded by the Commonwealth Fund, showed that Black residents were kicked out of training programs at a far higher rate than their white counterparts. So the anxiety is real. All these factors result in a healthcare system in which diversity is severely underrepresented. Those who do survive then start to blunt aspects of themselves in an effort not to stick out. Unfortunately, this is the very thing that stops us from connecting with the people who need us the most, and it's a great disservice to all concerned. I learned a great word from a South African friend of mine, a Zulu word. The word is ukuzilanda. I love that pronunciation. It means go and fetch yourself, including your past, to inform the present and the future. I love that concept because it brings this problem into focus and gives us a way to address it on an individual basis. Bringing your whole self into the interaction opens the door for a more trust-based relationship. The task of fully understanding our patients begins with fully understanding ourselves, so that we know that we can bring our whole selves just as we are, so that we can serve our patients just as they are. When a doctor takes their own story and journey out of the equation, it removes from the system the very thing it needs most, the human dimension at the core of health equity. The great impact of our diverse backgrounds and lived experience is to close what has been described as an empathy gap in healthcare, which is when a majority system does not see the unique humanity of people who are different. And having a diverse team helps us to mitigate that. But that's not going to happen by default. A rising tide is not going to raise all boats in this case, because the factors that create the disparities are so deeply rooted. We must be intentional about elevating and celebrating our differences. The ways that we're different are the ways that we support a diverse world. Note that there does not have to be an exact match between the diversity of your clinical team and the diversity of your patients. We know that when it's an exact match is optimal, but you actually get the benefit even if the match is not exact. The key is that as you advance diversity in your team, you increase cultural humility in the whole, as they get to see and respect different perspectives because they get to experience it in people who they already like and trust. I'd like to share with you the story of my boss and mentor from early in my career, Dr. Kendall Spratt. He's a man who fully embodied what it means to bring your whole authentic self into service. An African-American man from Beaumont, Texas. His father and two uncles were physicians, and they ran the hospital in their hometown, Spratt Hospital, which was designated for the care of African-American patients and which employed African-American doctors and nurses. So he grew up knowing firsthand the value of having a clinical team that shared background and lived experience with the patients that they serve. It makes a difference to how you interact with your patients and a difference to the outcomes. And so he was always intentional about celebrating unique aspects of our lives and those of our patients and fostering connections. He would often say, this patient over here has this background or interest in common with you. You should talk to them. You'd make a great physician for them. It sounds simple, but for these patients, it wasn't the norm. And in so doing, he built a workforce that was uniquely connected to the patients that we served. He also was intentional about advancing clinical leadership that was as diverse as our patient population, with the understanding that such representative leadership would advance policies that are culturally impactful to our community. When it came time for him to move on, he charged the search committee who was looking for his replacement to try to find an African-American leader. Because for this 98% African-American population that we serve, the ability to see and interact with a physician who looked like them was every bit as important an intervention as any medical diagnosis or treatment. So here is my ask of you. To anyone out there who's hesitant to pursue a career or serve in any space because you think you might not be a fit, your voice and your story are desperately needed, especially in healthcare. As we work to build a more equitable society, let us be intentional about developing and celebrating the beautiful melting pot of our diverse stories. Recruit and advance diversity in your team. Make a point to support them with mentors, sponsors, coaches, fostering a culture of inclusivity and belonging. The world, our community, and our patients need our differences, so embrace it. Step into that space. Bring your whole story. There's someone out there waiting for you to answer the question, who is going to understand me now? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anyaoku. Really appreciate it. Our next speaker is an author, a nonprofit photographer, and an activist. Her talk is entitled Love in Action, a surprising prescription for grief. Please welcome to the stage, Laura Formentini.
It's a bright morning in August 2019. I am in Africa, in rural Ethiopia, just south of Addis Ababa, the capital, collecting stories from some of the locals for my work. Suddenly, my phone rings. It's my older son, Shane, calling from the States. Mom, please sit down. I have to tell you something. I freeze. My gut says that whatever that something is, it will be awful. His next words are something a mother never wants to hear. They found Blaze in a park. He killed himself. Blaze was my youngest son. He was only 21 years old. That found him 8,300 miles away from me on the other side of the world. 8,300 miles away from me. Suddenly, everything went dark. I felt like I was going to faint. On that day, I found out that my son had taken his life. One of the Ethiopians I was working with grabbed my arm and guided me to sit down. I was speechless. I started crying and just couldn't stop. I was so shaken that I felt like I was going to lose my mind. But I didn't have time to lose my mind, because I knew I had to get back immediately to the States, which was an impossible task. It took us about an hour to drive from the rural area where we were to Addis Ababa, the capital, to find a travel agency. It took another 2 hours for me to find my itinerary. I'd fly by myself from Addis Ababa to Dublin, Ireland, to Boston, Massachusetts, and finally to Denver, Colorado. It would be a total of 42 hours by myself. By now, I am mentally and emotionally utterly exhausted. My first flight wouldn't leave for another 10 hours. How would I ever make it? How? I myself. By now, there were about 6 farmers from Ethiopia left in my group. And soon they all had to leave because of their own obligations. They were still trying to take care of me. making phone calls and talking amongst themselves. I wasn't even functioning. All I could think of was my son was dead. I was still reeling from the news that he killed himself. It was such a blur. But all I know is what came next impacted me in such a powerful way that it changed the course of the next 4 years of my life. A stranger, a friend of the group whom I didn't know, had volunteered to stay with me that day. Over the next 10 hours, I shared my personal history and the news that my son had taken his life with the stranger, as he held my hand and consoled me. He took me to lunch, to an archaeological museum, and he even showed me the building where he and his family lived. For over 10 hours, this man I hadn't known held my hand almost the entire time. When it came time for him to leave, I had one question. Why did you do all of that for me? You have no idea who I am. His answer struck me to my core. I didn't do anything special, Laura. I am your brother, and you are my sister. It was my human responsibility. Now, how do we define human responsibility? You won't find it in the Webster Dictionary. You won't find it in an encyclopedia. But what you will find is that on September 1st, 1997, the Interaction Council, which is an organization of 30 former heads of state and prime ministers, proposed a universal declaration of human responsibilities. This declaration was founded on the idea that when people fulfill their obligations to one another and to the local, regional, national, and international communities, human rights will be better safeguarded or secured. After these past few years, I have come to realize that human responsibility stems from us, right here and right now. We have an obligation to each other because we are all human beings sharing the same planet. Back to this angel who materialized out of the blue that day my son died. What his actions did helped me when I couldn't help myself, when I wanted to fall to my knees and not take another step. What I know with every fiber of my being is that I would have never made it on those flights without the presence of the stranger on that day. If you ask him, he'd say he hadn't done anything special. He believed that. But if you ask me, he saved my life. In the weeks following my son's passing, I tried to make sense of how my grief had shifted. And ultimately, I came to understand that it was something that came from the stranger. My grief had actually started dissipating with the stranger's kindness. I also realized that there was a universal theme about grief. When we are grieving and suffering, it is simply the energy of love that is stuck inside of us with nowhere to go. Love in action unleashes that energy and unlocks our grief. This love in action is something that I discovered with the stranger's kindness. This encounter with one stranger's random act of kindness is what I came to understand as love in action. Love in action can be done anywhere with anyone, but it must be done out in the world far enough away from our known proximity for us to genuinely touch one another. Whether it's a random act of kindness, volunteering in our neighborhood, or acting worldwide. I didn't realize it, but I have been practicing love in action for the past 20 years. During that time, I have sponsored more than 50 children, traversed the world as a nonprofit photographer, fundraised for children's homes and animal welfare organizations, created an animal sanctuary, and funded college tuition for disadvantaged high schoolers. Again, love in action can be practiced anywhere by any one of us the minute we step outside of our home. What the stranger did was help me when I couldn't help myself. This is my vision. It's a physical place. It's not a center. It's not a retreat. It's not a place that you typically think of where people go to heal themselves. My vision is more like a sanctuary because the love of a mother is one of the highest forms of love. It's a place where a mother can leave her grief and suffering behind, where she can feel safe and protected, but especially where she can re-experience the simplicity of being a child again herself. The truth is, although the sanctuary is inspired for grieving mothers, anyone going through grief or experiencing loss, this is for you. My vision is incomplete, but it does include animals and colorful activities to reignite the imagination, such as making clothes for the animals. Can you imagine sitting there making a skirt or a dress for a goat? I can. Or plant your own tree, making colorful pottery. The point is, every activity can bring out our inner child and help us shed our heaviness, because we all need to play. And yet we all know that to sustain a vision takes a deeper reason to pull us along when we want to give up. So what is my reason? What does your reason look like? If you don't know, start with love in action. Whether loss takes you to your knees or not, whatever it is, loss is loss. And it has a particular flavor that we all taste at some point or another in our lives. Love in action, whether you touch or are touched, can propel you and move your life forward. For the first 6 months after my son died, grief, suffering, and fear completely consumed me. Now, on most days, love in action is the friend I turn to, and it's the best friend I want to have. In many ways, Blaze was my best friend. And as the soulmate that he was, he'd often cheer me on with his usual, "Rock on, Mom." And I know that he's proud of the work we have been doing together. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Laura. Our next speaker is a percussionist, singer, and a Yoruba priest. Please welcome to the stage, Gino Castillo.
Hello. When I was 5 years old, back then, and I know that's a long time ago, in Ecuador, South America, where I used to live and I was born, we used to have every day at noon, 1 hour TV show that plays video clips. So I never missed one of those shows. I was 5, but I was so driven by music that I just sat there and watched all those videos. But one day, that was the local band, the first Ecuadorian rock and roll legit band. So that was the first time that I saw local guys with long hair, leather jackets, and banging drums. And that's exactly what gave me so catch on the TV. When they start shooting the first, on the first side, the drummer, I got stunned and I was like this and just thinking. And I thought something very strange hit my soul and said, I want to do that the rest of my life. And then after the show finished, I ran to my mom and I went to say, Mom, I know what I want to do. I want to be a musician. I want to play the drums. And guess what my mom said? He said, are you crazy? No, I'm just kidding. She said, okay, if you want to be a musician, you got to go to the conservatory. So next week, I was in the conservatory trying to get lessons, and that's how it started my long roller coaster life and career as a musician, because I started trying to play drums, but that's another long story in the conservatory. They just brought me to the piano, and I didn't want to play piano, and then I went to play guitar, and then I tried to sing, and then I tried to play violin. I was horrible playing violin. I always want to play drums. So that very expensive violin that my grandfather gave me, one day, with another long story, I just traded for a very, very, very crappy drum set, and I carried like 6 blocks on my shoulders. I get to my house, and I start playing drums. So if I start telling you the story of my life in music and religion and life, and started in Ecuador, and then I moved to Cuba. I grew up in Cuba, and then I moved to the U.S., we will need like 3 or 4 hours. And because I don't have much time, I would like to show you what I do, what is my life, what I do for a living, what feeds my spirit, what keeps me alive, that is playing, singing music, my own songs, and that's what I'm going to show you right now. Omi tuto ona tuto tuto ile tuto la roye tuto la ferola tuto elegua tuto aricuiba bagua elegua echo a la guana nico coribilla bala atento manicondolu y cuyelete baraquielu echu afra a la coma go a la mumbata.
De los míos, gritos completos. Perdona si mi habla responde a todos los instintos que te reconocen hoy. Ya yo no sé si entregarme completo y mirar de frente al miedo a que se esconda, sin pensar después, sin pensar ahora, solo ver que un día tú a mí me respondas. Perdona si he venido hoy a perturbar tus sueños. Tu calor me absorbe como un niño de pecho que come. Hoy me vuelvo yo, todos mis instintos me reconocen. Y solo vivo hoy. Si un día te fallé, por favor, perdóname. Te juro que no sé cómo hasta aquí yo llegué. Me hace falta tu calor, tu conversación y tu pasión. Perdóname, perdóname, perdóname. No me dejes solo, corazón. Perdóname, perdóname, perdóname. ¿Cómo fue digo todo y me quedo sin nada para ti, nada para allá. Que me quedo sin nada para la batalla y los secretos se van con Sabina y con los más. Que quiero ver tu biografía, me pongo cheo, madre mía, y eso a mí me gusta más. Me revelo y más. Que escribo en cacofonías y eso te tráeme al final del día, pero dame más y más de tu misterio, más y más. Viendo la luna en la mitad del día, desde el balcón de tu terraza clandestina. Y no me importa el porqué de lo que esta vez te cuento. Las ranas y las princesas envidian nuestro momento. Si los robots se apoderan del resto del universo, a mí ya nada me importa. Si hemos parido estos besos. Me preguntes más, ay mira dime más. Que te lo digo todo y me quedo sin nada, 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 nada. No me preguntes más. Que me quedo sin nada para la batalla y los secretos se van, se van, se van, se van. Ay, mira, dime más. Que quiero ver tu biografía, me pongo cheo, madre mía, y eso a mí me gusta más. De tu misterio más, cada día un poco más. Flores, flores, ahí viene la jardinera para entregarte mis flores. Mi corazón se acelera, tengo esperanza que tú me quieras también y quéreme como te quiero yo, y un poquito más. Y muévete, muévete. Quéreme como te quiero yo, y un poquito más. Yo quiero que tú me quieras, mamá, un poquito más. Yo lo que quiero más, mi linda, que me dé un poquito de tu corazón, porque te quiero más y más. ¿Cómo? Y quiéreme, 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 como te quiero yo, y un poquito más. No es rico los besitos que me das por aquí y por allá. Changui pa' ti. No sé decirte cómo fue, pero de ti me enamoré, de tu misterio más. Mira que yo quiero saber que genera el olor de tu amor y tu geografía, pero que más y más de tu misterio.
Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Gino. I am missing Abby. Why don't you come out here?
Introduce me.
Yes.
Oh, this is so nice. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you to Gino and all of our speakers so far. We should give them a little round of applause. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. All right. And it's almost time for our intermission. But before we let you all go, I think it's time we get into our own little narrative. I am going to be telling you all about what happens before you all get in your seats. So first off, I'll say the in-between between the previous event and the one we have now, the celebration is very short. We get right back into things. The first thing we typically do is rack our brains for a theme. That usually takes a little bit. Sometimes we ask the public. But this year we've come up with narratives, hence why we are telling you a little narrative. We meet every Friday during the week just to plan. We try to keep up with social media. We try to find people that will pay us. That's usually really special. It's nice that we can find those.
Thank you to the people that did.
Thank you to the people that paid us. And also, we rack our brains trying to find out when the heck Bellarmine's homecoming week is.
Yes.
Good gosh, it's harder than you would think. My gosh.
You'd think it'd be the same time every year.
At the same time, it's not. It's not. It's very hard. But then come November through January, it's go time. We got to reserve the space, get our sign all prettied up, which I think it is, and make sure that our speakers are ready to blow it out of the water, which I think that they have. But all right, it is about time. I think we let you all go for intermission. Just to let you all know, we cannot let you back out into the lobby when talks resume. So please be in your chair promptly once intermission ends. But for now, enjoy food. And remember, no food or drinks can be brought into the auditorium.
And intermission will be about 15 minutes.
Exactly.
We'll see you all back here then.
We'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's a lot of
You
people.
can see them now.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, jeez.
Nice.
Nicely done.
Yeah, nice. Good.
Thanks.
Good work.
Same to you. Did the first half. I have to use the
Thank
restroom.
you.
I know, isn't that great?
Really
right, everybody, welcome back. How was intermission? It's good?
Good.
Yeah?
Nice.
Too long, that's what I like to hear. That's what I like to hear.
There you go.
All right, so before we get back to the good speakers and the theme of our narrative, I'm going to talk a little bit about what goes on during the show. So while you guys are sitting in your seats, everybody, including that man right there, everybody's got a walkie-talkie, and they're all talking to each other. We don't have one,
No,
so
we're
we don't
left
really
out.
know what's going on. But everybody else talking to each other, there's text messages going on all the time. There's also a green room in the back that can be accessed. This is how these speakers are mysteriously coming up here. There's stairs back behind here that are super long. They go through a really cold, long tunnel into a secret underground room. I'm not joking. That's where they are. And then they can see me talking about it right now on a monitor down there, which is pretty cool. Another thing is, backstage, I always dance and give a pep talk to the other speakers.
They don't want it.
Yeah. Yeah, mostly they're not asking for it. But welcome everybody back. So in that note, I'm going to bring on our next speaker. What?
There you go. Thank you.
Oh, whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah, that's it.
All
That's
right.
it. Thank you.
Our next speaker is a Bellarmine Honors alum, has a growing presence in the Jewish community, and is my actual beautiful partner.
She told him to say that.
Her talk is entitled, Here I Am, Rediscovering the First Female Rabbi. Please welcome to the stage the beautiful Bridget Bard.
I learned years ago that I was being called to become Jewish. And you may wonder, how could you possibly know that? How could you know you want to convert to a new religion? And I would say, these are fantastic questions that I would love to answer in a different TED Talk. For now, believe with me that I was being called to become Jewish. I started working with Rabbi Rapport, who I met here at Bellarmine, to learn as much as I could about Judaism, to ask as many questions as I could, and eventually it was time for me to pick my Hebrew name. Now, most people will pick their Hebrew name based on their secular name, but those options just weren't quite doing it for me. So, Rabbi Rapport encouraged me to do some research and find stories of Jewish people whose name I might like to carry on. After a couple conversations, looking through the Jewish Women's Archive, and then stumbling into a couple different World War II timelines, I met Regina. Regina Jonas was born in Berlin in 1902 in a poor Jewish neighborhood. Her friends recalled that from an early age, she talked about wanting to become a rabbi. The only problem being that no woman had ever been ordained a rabbi before. Still, she was set on this seemingly impossible task from the moment she started school. Fast forward through her schooling during World War I, and Germany looks very different from the one she was born into. In 1930, Regina wrote her graduate thesis on the topic, May a Woman Hold Rabbinic Office? It was the first known attempt to find a halakhic basis for the ordination of women, and halakhic just refers to Jewish law. Her opening and closing statements sum up her sentiments well. In opening, she wrote, I personally love this profession, and if ever possible, I also want to practice it. She concluded her thesis, almost nothing halakhically but prejudice and lack of familiarity stand against women holding rabbinic office. Having found an ally in her plight, Rabbi Edward Baneth supervised Regina's thesis and graded it good. But unfortunately, he passed away soon after. And Edward's successor, Rabbi Hanek Albeck, was unwilling to ordain a woman as a rabbi, so Regina graduated as a religious teacher and was not ordained. Still, she did her best to serve her German Jewish community. By April 1933, when Jewish students began to be banned from public schools in Germany, Regina's world began to change very quickly. But despite her increased teaching workload, she continued to fight for her ordination. In 1935, after 5 years of service and continued self-advocacy, Rabbi Max Deineman agreed to her ordination and Regina Jonas became the first woman to be ordained as a rabbi. She would do her best to serve her German Jewish community for the next 7 years through her pastoral work, all while watching the continued rise of the Nazi regime and having her world close in around her. And in 1942, Rabbi Regina Jonas and her mother were deported to Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt was a Nazi propaganda machine, cleaned and painted beautiful enough to pass a Red Cross inspection in June of 1944, despite having thousands of people crammed into the walls and attics of the buildings with no access to proper hygiene, medical care, or food. While Theresienstadt was not a death camp, thousands of people died there due to the squalid conditions. Even then, though, Rabbi Regina Jonas was one of the first faces to greet new arrivals and introduce them to the limited resources of the ghetto. She gave lectures. She cared for her neighbors. She offered spiritual guidance and comfort, all while living in a literal hell. In October 1944, Rabbi Regina Jonas and her mother were deported to Auschwitz and were likely killed the same day. They were 7 months away from liberation. Several of her contemporaries survived their time in Theresienstadt, including the former leader of German Jewry, Rabbi Leo Beck, and the psychoanalyst Viktor Frankl. Despite having lived and worked alongside Regina, they never spoke of her. In 1972, Sally Priesand became the first woman to be ordained by a rabbinical seminary. The Berlin Wall still stood, guarding the only records that we have of Regina. It wasn't until 1989, when the Berlin Wall finally fell, that the very few writings we have of Regina were found in the Archive of German Jews in East Berlin. And Regina was found to be the first woman to be ordained as a rabbi 17 years after Sally Priesand. In August 2021, I became Jewish and took my Hebrew name, Regina. I swore that I would never let her story disappear again. As long as I am on this earth, we will not forget a woman brave enough to become the first female rabbi while living in Nazi Germany. But in order to best carry her name, I felt called to see the places that she had lived. So in July 2022, thanks to a program called Melton International, I was blessed to visit Berlin, Prague, and even Theresienstadt, which is a place that people do still call home today. But it was a difficult place for me and my travel companions to be. The air felt thick and heavy, and the feeling of eyes peering at us was constant. Regina's name was nowhere to be found. Not on a plaque, not in the museum, not even in the hidden synagogue, a place so hidden that even many of the Jews detained in Theresienstadt did not know it existed. I had hoped to feel traces of her boundless energy there, but I could not find her. We moved on to Berlin, and on a street no different than any other, we came upon a plaque indicating the house that she had grown up in. A few paragraphs about her life, one of the only photos that we have of her. Even then, I looked for her up and down the street, in the windows, in doorways, in the faces of my fellow travel companions, but I couldn't feel her. I couldn't see her. She was gone. I had hoped to feel an ounce of her energy lingering in the streets that she had called home. Some quiet whisper on a Berlin breeze to say, "Here I am." I felt like I hadn't come any closer to Regina than I had before I left. But despite the pain of staring history in the face and the anxiety of standing on the ground that so many lost lives had called home, I felt myself growing, steadying in my identity. When I looked in the mirror, I felt like I looked more like myself than I ever had before. I was more self-assured, grateful, more spontaneous to grasp every last moment that I have. I realized weeks later that I had been looking for Regina in all the wrong places. I had been looking for her in windows and doorways of old buildings, when she was really waiting for me in the mirror. Regina wasn't gone. She was in me. I and all of my Jewish friends here tonight are evidence of her legacy. The quiet voice I had hoped to hear on a Berlin breeze turned into a steady voice, a confirmation of her memory in someone destined to remember. My voice speaking for us both, saying, "Here I am, Regina." Even beyond the grave, Regina continues to spiritually guide me, and she empowers me to be fearlessly Jewish, to not let history dictate my callings and my future. So the next time you need to remember someone brave, you need to channel some chutzpah, some audacity, remember Regina. Tell her story. Imagine a woman so powerful, just the idea of her can enliven your spirit and bolster your identity. And she knew the vastness of her work even then, as she wrote, "Our work here in Theresienstadt, serious and full of trials as it is, also serves this end, to be God's servants, and as such, to move from earthly spheres to eternal ones. May our work here be a blessing for the future of the Jewish people and the future of humanity." Rabbi Regina Jonas.
Thank you, Bridget. Our next speaker goes by many, many names. I know because we've spent a long time trying to fit all of them onto this slide. So what I'm going to call him is the Louisville Urban League Farmer. His talk is titled, "1,000 Backyard Farms Growing a Legacy." Please welcome to the stage, Vaughn Barnes.
All right. What's up, everybody? How's everybody doing today? That's good. Now, I'm going to start with wake up. Wake up, little farmer inside of you all, wake up. I need the little farmer inside you all to wake up. Now, I'm going to bring your attention to a post that was on my Instagram back in 2021. And it's the quote that you guys read right now, but it's the caption that I want you all to see. Because this is the catalyst for the narrative that I have today. So head nod to my friend John DeBarber that's in Toronto, but we made a song and his lyrics went, "Look, Mom and Dad, I'm on TV." But the irony for me is I'm not behind the camera. Now, this is a narrative all about how my life got turned upside down. How I went from the camera guy to this guy right now. And how the little farmer in me woke up and stood proud. See, I had this unfortunate opportunity. The opportunity? Well, I get to go to Jamaica. I get to go to the beautiful island of Jamaica in the middle of March, man, and leave Kentucky and go to Jamaica? But the unfortunate part is I'm going to help my father bury his brother. Now, my dad had left Jamaica in 1979, and he had not been back to that side of Jamaica in 30-something years. So there's family members he hadn't seen, places that he hasn't seen, but because of the situation, he asked for me to come with him down to Jamaica, and we're going to bury his brother. Now, we fly into Montego Bay, opposite of Kingston, and we're in Mo Bay, and my cousin picks us up from the airport, and this is the first time I'm seeing my cousin now. And when I see my cousin, I don't know her, but she's shocked to see us, and she knows who we are. I had no clue. We drive an hour and a half south into the foothills of St. Elizabeth Parish, and man, it was a beautiful sight. I mean, we get to those hills and we get to the view, and every morning I wake up and I see this view. Every morning, just like this. I look out and I see this view. But the first thing that we talk about when we get there is the food system. If you want fruits and you want to drink something in the morning, you must pick banana and coconuts and mangoes, and that's one side of the farm. And the chickens are all over the place, and if you want eggs, they on the other side of the farm, and they underneath this bush here. But if you want milk, we got to get things from the garden, provisions from the garden, and we got to walk a mile down in the new market and trade with people. Now, this is my first time in a situation like this. I said, all right, cool, there's no problem. And she wanted to show me off, so of course we walk that mile and we trade, and people see us and they say, oh yeah, you was a Barnes, I can see it. But I'm gonna fast forward to the part, the alarm that went off, that woke my little farmer up. We're at the funeral now. And just the same way that you all are in here, we in the church, and it's standing room only. I mean, shoulder to shoulder. You can't move in there. You can't go down no aisles. It's none of that. It's just a straight shot to the man in the casket. And there's a reserved section in the front, but we couldn't make it. We got there late. So we standing in the back, and my cousin, she got on shades, and they call them darkers. Darkers because you can't see through them, but all you see is tears running down her face. And the man, I'm telling you, whew, ain't enough Kleenex to sop up all the tears that day because of who that man was. And the legacy that he had, and how much the people appreciated him. It's my turn now. God, I said I wasn't going to do this part. So me and my cousin now, we walking down the island. And I'm telling you, I still feel it. Like right now, I feel it. I look into the casket, and if you never buried a parent, this is my moment. Because when I look in the casket now, I had to double take, and my dad is sitting over here, and he's crying. It's the first time I've ever seen my dad cry. But when I look down, I'm like, woo. My dad and my uncle, they look so much alike. And it hit me. If they that much alike, and when we went into the new market and she said, oh yeah, you were Barnes, and my cousin seen me at the airport and she knew who I was, then I carry that same legacy too. It hit me all at once. I said, okay, well now, if that's who my father's father was and my father's brother was, my dad, of course, did the same thing. They on the same land. This is the same property they had from years back. Then, of course, this is who I am, too. I got to change some stuff. So when I tell my friends sometimes, hey, bro, I'm leaving you. You understand me, right? I get back to United States, and immediately I said, man, I got to change some stuff. I took my backyard from what you see there from spring to summer, immediately changed over. And for 7 years, it's incubating. I'm working on this backyard farm. I'm starting to change my health habits. I'm eating different, and I'm going to the gym. I'm trying to grow my stuff, and I'm conserving water because I appreciate different now. And can nobody tell me, oh, man, you look mad? You don't even know what I just went through. Still don't know what I'm going through now. So you can't tell me how I feel, I know my legacy. I know my legacy. You can't tell me that. So 2020 happens to me, and then all of a sudden things change, and I lose my source of income, but I got my backyard farming. I said, you know what, with all these chickens and these eggs that I got, I started a group on Nextdoor. Nextdoor matures into people wanting to get eggs, and y'all know what the egg prices are looking like now. So I was ahead of the curve. Man, I lose my job, but it's all right. I'm out here working with nonprofit organizations, and I'm getting with this place and that place, and I'm meeting people, and I'm all over. Everybody you know me, I'm all over the place. Why? Because I appreciate different. Y'all don't understand it, but I appreciate different. You're not gonna outwork me because I appreciate different. I'm there. I'm working with people, I'm putting on workshops, I'm with nonprofit organizations, I'm up and down USDA, this, school, that, anything to get people closer to food because food access is important. Then I find out this crazy news. As much work as we doing here in Kentucky, Kentucky happens to be one of the hungriest states. How in the world are we an agriculture state, but still 9th hungriest states in America? We're number 9. And when it comes to food insecurity, there's 31,000 people in the Louisville metro area that's food insecure. And I'm explaining what that means. You got a job. You just over broke. So you working, you paying your bills, you doing all the essentials, but when it comes to that food part, you make a decision. And I'm gonna show you an example of what that means, like if you ever been to a college campus. If you ever seen that flyer when it said free food, free pizza, and you show up for that, when you show up for that and you just get the free pizza and then you wanna get out of here, that's what food insecurity looks like. Because you got enough money, but you can't qualify for federal aid. So now, what can we do? So what if we had all hands on deck? Could we change the food system just a tad bit? Food insecurity, we can change that. We can change it in the state. We might be able to change that in the city. And most importantly, we can change it in our neighborhoods. Here's some examples. Amanda Fuller with Lots of Food. She gets 3 properties in Portland neighborhood. She starts an orchard. She grows fruits, berries, vegetables, all the stuff. And she names her farm Lots of Food. Then you got Mario and Michael. Mario's somewhere here in the crowd. But they had a farm that they said, you know what, we got this property, we got the place next door to it. What if we start growing cucumbers and we take these cucumbers and we make pickles? But then when the pandemic happened, they said, you can't even get people to get out and do something. They need that nutrition before they could even think to move. So why don't we just grow stuff and give it away for free? For free. It's Fifth Element Farm. And then you got Stephen Edwards. His house is in the West End. He got 2 properties beside his house. He decides that he wants to start to do mental health, wellness. He grows a garden, and then he started to sell plants. Or really, his tagline is he's starting to sell hope. Hope Garden. You know, he's selling hope. I went from here to Atlanta, was at another TED Talk. That's what actually sparked my idea to say, you know what, we can talk about this here too. I meet Sean D'Angelo, and Sean D'Angelo is doing Everybody Eats Atlanta, where he's trying to change the food system down in Atlanta. And then I flew all the way to Arizona to meet Viral Sensation. This is Chuck Collins. He's a chicken daddy. Yeah, that's him in a tutu. But he also has fish in his backyard in Arizona. Now, I need everybody to put that together. Fish, water in your backyard in Arizona. How is this possible? Well, I'm going to tell you, there's people all over trying to do this. Everybody's trying to do this work. The USDA just dropped $7.5 million. They made it open to anybody trying to get into urban ag and innovative growing. So if you have an idea that you want to try to implement, now is the time. There's money out here for anybody that wants to try to aid and change the food system. Now, if you're local, go to foodandneighborhoods.org, foodandneighborhoods.org. You can find other working groups. We got a $250,000 grant that we're working on right now to just work on the food system in Louisville. It's a planning grant. So we need everybody's ideas, your thoughts. Come and speak at these groups. We need everybody. Because, I mean, if you eat, this involves you too. Now, if you was to ask this guy right here with that little kid, if you'd ask this guy, would he be in agriculture? 9 times out of 10, he would have told you, yeah, as a kid, I don't know about it. But then as a kid, everybody got dreams. It could have been possible. I would have been a farmer. Who knows? Thank y'all.
Good job, man. Thank you, Vaughn. Our next speaker is a teacher, a mother, and she says tonight, a reluctant speaker. Her talk is entitled, I Think I Got My Degrees Just So I Can Raise My Children. Please welcome to the stage, Emmy Ammirati.
I never thought I would be a teacher. Excessively introverted, I prefer interacting with objects and ideas more than people. But after I moved back to my hometown carrying a 2-year-old and an art degree, I discovered the only graduate program I could easily access was a master's in learning disabilities. I was in love with my 2-year-old, so helping other children, especially those with learning challenges, seemed like it would be a useful goal to give me purpose. So, my path set, I dove into aspiring theories of the human mind. For instance, psychologists like Howard Gardner have rejected intelligence as a single measure of language-based and mathematical functioning and argued instead the existence of multiple intelligences: visual, spatial, musical, naturalist, interpersonal, meaning social, and so on. Instructional strategies that appeal to these diverse intelligences and multiple senses activate neural pathways to help students internalize content. Taken together, what do these concepts tell us? First of all, everyone has more and less developed areas of brilliance. More importantly, everyone can learn. I confronted these ideas while teaching a class of 5th and 6th graders with severe learning disabilities. My students' functional reading and math levels ranged from pre-kindergarten to 3rd grade. So we conscientiously applied multisensory instruction and other strategies to remediate off-level skills. The principal initially questioned if some of my other lessons were too difficult for my students. We read grade level novels aloud, and the students, invigorated by making predictions and debating characters, groaned each time we put those books away. My favorite lesson used this painting, Raphael's School of Athens, as a springboard to address a 6th grade standard on the philosophers of ancient Greece. The students had expressed interest in another Renaissance work, the Sistine Chapel ceiling. So I used it for this lesson, and they devoured the painting, the figures, and the way those thinkers' ideas eventually influenced painters like Michelangelo. One day, our behavior interventionist made an offhand remark that I consider the greatest compliment I've ever received. Those kids are coming out of Ms. Ammirati's room using words in conversation that I never even thought they would understand. In our bright spots, we pushed our boundaries and played to our strengths. But stretched thin and fighting time, we also suffered, like this fellow. One 6th grader who wrestled with 1st grade level text pulled me aside and whispered, Ms. Ammirati, when I go to middle school next year, there won't be any books that I can read in the library. A student with severe ADHD who defaulted to hair pulling resisted replacement behaviors like playing with a Velcro strip that we adhered inside his desk. After our counselor called his parents to express concern, he arrived at school trying to cover his head, which had been unevenly shaved. My heart plunges heavy and helpless at these memories. I prefer to recall the first student's gliding dance moves and the second's glow when he cracked the secret to simple word problems, because those were the times they felt no limits. My reflections on intelligence and norms became more significant after my second child was born. He had oral motor delays and struggled to take in nutrition, so I decided to leave my classroom. Shortly thereafter, I discovered that both my children are neurodivergent, diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and attention deficit disorder. Both navigate chronic anxiety and occasional depression. At age 9, my daughter also shared with me her knowledge that she is transgender. You can see why I started to think I got my degrees just so I can raise my children. In early childhood, my daughter was adorable, as you can see, bright and well-behaved, if clingy. When I dropped her off at preschool, she cried hysterically. But she had no trouble learning or playing with friends. Then, as she got older, she started to solve math problems in messy, divergent ways, refusing to write out the steps, but almost always getting the right answers. In 5th grade, she started over-focusing on her handwriting. If it wasn't perfect, it distracted her from the learning content. Even though our Catholic school had no resource support, her teachers agreed to let her type instead of handwrite her work. In 6th grade, as her anxieties increased, she began therapy for autism with adolescent onset, ADD, and when she was ready to discuss it with the counselor, gender dysphoria. My daughter wanted to stay in school with her friends, so she chose to remain a Catholic schoolboy until 8th grade graduation. In public high school, she began to transition and found acceptance from friends old and new. As her hair grew longer, she wore gender-neutral clothing and avoided the bathrooms to avoid rocking the boat in our very conservative Southern school district. When she had to take PE, she went into the boys' locker room without overt complaints. But she never hid who she was. She wrote in her first day about me note to the PE coach, "I'm transgender and that's pretty cool." Soon, some students from the locker room began to harass her, and after several weeks of escalating anxiety, she started refusing to go to school. We met with the guidance counselor who promised support, but nothing changed. The school could not confirm bullying. The PE teacher did not heed the counselor's request to let my daughter change in the coach's office next to the locker room. Rolling her eyes at the coach's noncompliance, the guidance counselor announced the best solution. My daughter should withdraw from the 3/4 completed PE class and retake it the next semester online. I withdrew my daughter from PE and later from the public high school. When I visited the assistant superintendent to argue about the PE credit, he summarized my frustration better than I was able. My daughter had never requested special treatment. She was just trying to learn in the context provided, but because of her difference, she wasn't respected, allowed to feel safe, or able to learn to the best of her ability. While my daughter was navigating adolescence, my son was ignoring developmental norms and doing everything in his own time. Until he was 18 months old, he rolled to get around, then he crawled for 2 days, stood up, and walked. He didn't speak until he was 2 1/4, but when he did, he knew all his colors and transitioned rapidly to complete sentences. He lived off pancakes, yogurt, and strained fruit, but our state's early intervention program refused him services because he didn't score 2 standard deviations below the mean on their assessments. By August of 1st grade, he still couldn't identify all letters of the alphabet, but then by December, true to form, he was reading at grade level. When he resisted memorizing math facts, I taught him to add and subtract, and later multiply and divide, using a multisensory method that he still applies today. By now, our Catholic school had a resource teacher with whom my son met twice a week. In class, he was quiet and cooperative, except when he was anxious and refused to communicate. His attentional issues manifested as his playing Pong and a wandered-off mind. But at home, he was a firecracker, so I continuously revised plans to support behavior. He attended weekly therapy with a psychologist for anxiety, ADHD, and school problems. We also accessed private occupational therapy because his teachers had concerns about his handwriting, but our school district rejected him for services. Once again, he did not score 2 standard deviations below the mean on their assessments. When he was 7, the resource teacher began to push me to have him formally diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. If he were diagnosed, she said, she could write him an individualized education program with a social skills goal. That way, she said, he wouldn't grow up and find himself unable to hold down a job even at Walmart like some other students she'd had. I asked why, if he was already receiving accommodations, he required that specific label for the school to address his communication patterns and tendency to spend part of recess wandering alone. I also asked at what point we cross the line between offering productive supports to pathologizing difference in a way that limits positive outcomes. 2 years later, for unrelated reasons, I transferred my son to online public school. At home, we adapt and supplement curriculum materials while personalizing his schedule and applying strategies to navigate challenges. He has a formal diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder now because in our current educational context, it's the best way to access the accommodations that he needs for learning and testing. With these accommodations, and despite his anxiety, he successfully navigated last spring's round of state testing, the first he'd ever had to go through, to score proficient and advanced on all the subjects assessed. I embrace his and my daughter's cognitive differences, but wonder why they must be labeled a disorder. I also ask myself how many different boxes they will, at some point, have to contort themselves to fit into to navigate the world on its terms. Too often, we focus so intently on norms and differences that we overlook individuals' unique intelligences and strengths. For instance, my daughter, while often anxious living as herself, is the bravest young adult I know. She graduated from high school a year early with honors, and just before her 21st birthday, she moved across the country to a more liberal West Coast setting where she feels more comfortable. She voice acts, writes plot notes for a video game developer, and can turn just about any image into creepy pixel art, as you see here. She can also tell you more about the history and artillery of World War II than anyone should be able. She is reflective, self-aware, and compassionate to the degree that she often puts her friends' problems before her own. And her creative cosplays inspire my son to costume as obscure characters many people won't recognize. The one in the bottom corner is not Spider-Man. Like his sister, my son is self-reflective and loving and can explain his thought processes and anxieties in greater detail than most adults. He has perfect pitch and bursts often into self-invented songs, making our lives a Broadway musical. He has created an illustrated character that he can represent in any mood with a few quick swipes of a pencil. As a middle schooler, he wields words like iteration correctly, knows intimate details about the construction of the Titanic, and he ponders whether putting an artwork like Van Gogh's Starry Night on a mouse pad devalues its greatness. He also lectures me on social skills. Right before Christmas, when my brother arrived from New York, I did not go in the kitchen to say hello because I was in the midst of one of my own periods of hyperfocus, trying to revise my resume. My son came and scolded me for being socially inappropriate. If you haven't inferred by now, my children come by their autism diagnoses honestly. So maybe I got my degrees just so I can raise my children. Without my studies, I would be far less able to navigate learning and behavior challenges and make costumes. On the other hand, the primary reason I am able to recognize the limitations of labels and the restrictions of societally constructed boxes, the reason I can recognize the very real diversity of genius and the right of everyone to be unashamedly who they are, is that I have seen the world in juxtaposition to and fought its sometimes strangling norms alongside my two no longer little wonders. When I told my disbelieving 13-year-old I was speaking here tonight, we played out a conversation written years ago by Ray Bradbury. It was turnabout, roundabout, learning both ways, and it's all in here, why I have it all. And I'll tell it to the others just as they tell their boys and girls in life to me. We'll sit there growing wiser and calmer and better. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmy. Our final speaker for the evening, I know you can be sad vocally, that's okay. Our final speaker is a doctor of social work, a mental health therapist, and an instructor. Her talk is entitled The Untold Narratives of Labeled Youth. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Brittany Gentry.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. According to the 2021 Crime and Report in Kentucky, youth under 17 represented 414 assault charges, 29 homicide arrests, 32 robbery arrests, and 95 weapons violations. Now, this is only a snapshot because not all youth-involved crime results in an arrest. For over 10 years, I've worked with what we label as at-risk youth, and one of the trends I've found that most of these kids just want a safe space to be authentic and vulnerable in a world that's quick to judge, but slow to forget. For 5 years, I worked at an alternative school where majority of our population had some involvement with some form of the juvenile court system. Now, during these 5 years, I often heard comments like, "Oh, you work at the school with the bad kids," or "Isn't that where all those juvenile delinquents are?" Or my favorite one was, "Aren't you afraid that these kids are gonna rob you or hurt you?" First response always was, "I wish those kids would. I am not the one. Don't let the size fool you." Second response is, "I don't see labels. I see youth in pain. I see youth that are misguided, misjudged. I see youth that need to be shown a different way." A lot of times, these youth just want to be heard, want to be seen. And what do kids do when they want to be seen? Good attention, bad attention, it's attention. This results in shootings in malls, drive-bys in broad daylight, riots and fights throughout the school, and kids being recognized with bringing weapons to school at an alarming rate just to feel safe. Well, now they're seen, now they're heard, but now they're labeled. For over 20 years, we give these kids labels such as super predators, thugs, criminals, gangbangers, and to tell my age, Bebe's kids. But ultimately, they just want to be seen, want to be embraced. But just like adult offenders in this world, when they're given this label, they're silenced. An old African proverb states that children who do not feel embraced by their village will burn it down to the ground to feel its worth. Well, I don't know about y'all, but it's hot. So a lot of times we think, what do? How do we keep these kids from burning things down to the ground? Fast forward to the 21st century, these kids aren't carrying torches. They have access to violence and weapons at an alarming rate due to social media and other internet outlets. So, how do we embrace them? Social theorists would say that giving them labels just further promotes them to try to emulate the label that they're given. Now, this is criticized because people will say, well, what if we just get rid of labels? Would we get rid of violence? Well, no. We have to look at the other contributing factors, the root causes to some of these youth-involved violent behaviors. One in which is profound, exposure to trauma. Now, Dr. Bruce Perry is a pioneer for how trauma affects the brain and behavior. I could bore you on another whole TEDx on what trauma does to the brain. But the main thing is that most of the time, you do not have access to the front part of your brain. Dr. Bruce Perry and a lot of his research show that in an arousal state, you only have access to your brain stem, in which you cannot make alarming decisions at that moment. So a lot of times, you're not even thinking straight, but yet we're treating them like adults, charging them like adults, but not embracing them, not listening to them. I will never forget when I met a 17-year-old kid who looked me dead in my eye and told me that he would be lucky if he made it to his 18th birthday. I just thought, why do you feel that way? Why can't anything change? He broke eye contact and told me that he didn't choose this life, the life chose him. He wouldn't wish it on anybody, but it was too late to change anything. I explained to him what trauma meant, how it can affect your brain, your behavior, your decisions. He didn't know any of it. He explained maybe if somebody had educated him on that, maybe back in middle school, he might actually give somebody a chance to show him that there was a different way. We went on to talk about what was some of the sources of his pain. His pain was lodged in the bullet that killed his best friend right in his arms. Death wasn't new to him. The burden he had to carry was the bullet that killed his best friend was really meant for him because of the life he chose. Every action has a reaction, and unfortunately his grief had a reaction that ultimately did take his life just weeks before his 18th birthday. Now there's thousands of stories like this all over this country. Kentucky is not the only one who suffers with a lot of youth-involved violence. So what do? When talking with some of the youth, they tell me the kill or be killed mentality. They rather have a gun than not have a gun because people just don't fight anymore. You can't be so sure that someone's going to catch some feelings when you start to actually win and try to up the ante to bring a gun. So I'd rather have my gun than not have my gun, even at school. So the million-dollar question is, how do we prevent these fires? In some literature by Dr. Ford and other colleagues, they revealed that oftentimes complex trauma shows in oppression, anger, aggression, anxiety, but conduct. These are the things that we are labeling these kids with, rather than hearing their stories, giving them some healing engagement to actually tell us what it is that they want. Through obtaining narratives from some of these kids with lived experiences, it can be the foundation to some of the programs that we build to help unify the kids who are too late or prevent the kids who are the siblings of these kids who are watching this day in and day out. We throw millions of dollars at programs to these people, or throw millions of dollars to these programs every year, and they just don't seem to work because we are not using the voices of these kids that we are expecting to actually participate in these programs. These kids are motivated by money, safety, and sometimes even power. Not power because they're trying to be grown, which we know they are, but power in knowing that they have some sense of self, that they're being seen, they're being heard. I have a former student that was sitting awaiting a youthful offender charge because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time with a friend he didn't know had a gun. When I went to the jail to interview him after, like, dude, what are you doing? The first thing he says, Ms. Gentry, I didn't even do anything. But now they say I'm a criminal. He's not a criminal. I had to write a letter to the judge that stated all his strengths. I wasn't even invited to the hearing to be able to say this is what he was doing prior to this one incident that is life-changing. But thank goodness the judge was trauma-informed. That letter, among other mentors and advocates in that kid's life, allowed for him to have a second chance where he graduated. He still kind of catches up with me on Instagram every now and then. He has 2 beautiful kids, being able to work and give them what he didn't have. That wouldn't have been possible if he wasn't seen and heard at the time. Now, I can't do this alone. More community partners need to come together and use the voices of our youth and the strength and support to help some of these youth see a different path. We don't always need to be competing with one another just because, yes, we need money to live, I get it. But we can collaborate more to secure more social connections and be more trauma-informed to understand, to use the term, like Dr. Bruce Perry says, what happened to you versus what are you doing? Let's break the labels, open our ears, open our arms, and prevent the fires. Thank you.
All right. Thank you to Dr. Gentry and to all of our TEDx speakers tonight. Let's give them a hand. Yes, thank you. We really hope you enjoyed your all show. before we let you all go tonight, I think it's time we finish our own little narrative. I'm here to tell you about what happens post-show, literally what's right about to happen.
Yeah.
But we have to make this theater look like we were never here, because sometimes other things happen here, I guess.
It's not just Ted.
It's not just Ted. We clear everything out. We try our best not to drop any of those Ted letters, because God forbid.
Shay would be very upset.
Shay would be very upset. We eat your leftover catering. Whatever you all leave, we are going to eat. We'll definitely finish off that Heaven Hill for you. It's no problem. Thank you. And all of us gather, the whole team, and take a bunch of pictures with the TED sign and celebrate our success, which we hope that it was. Thank
Yeah, it
you,
says
thank
prompt
you.
audience.
Yes, prompt audience.
Prompt
yes,
audience,
thank you.
that's what we're doing.
That's what we want.
The TEDx core team, we'd like to thank the TEDx core team, and the TEDx core team would like to thank everyone that came today. We'd like to thank the comm department, the DAT program, music department, art department, theater department, as well as all the students, the faculty, the staff who volunteered. Shay Goodlett, who I mentioned earlier, is very particular about the letters. He made this beautiful sign. I'm not supposed to step out of the circle. And then we'd also like to thank our corporate sponsors, Wacky Radio, Heaven Hill, Alaska Brewing Company, Center Goss, the Print Refinery, and Bellarmine SGA. Please stick around, enjoy the reception, and make sure you go and see the booths. All the artists and speakers have booths over in the Black Box Theater. It's just right out that door. You'll see it in the back. And remember, in the spirit of Bellarmine, remember to always explore the world and to start within.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Have a good night.